on this very busy Tuesday. As I mentioned this morning in the 5 Minute Morning, this would have been my mother's birthday. So January 7th is always a very meaningful day for me. She is gone now, but I still always think of January 7th. I think about her. Um, there's a couple of things that really came to the forefront today uh, about the league and where it's headed, and just about the idea of what it takes to find a head coach in this very modern, very changing NFL. The influence that these stock market wizards are going to have in professional sports, and you see them now getting more and more involved in professional sports. You've seen it most recently with the Mets. You've seen it obviously with what Tepper has done in Carolina. And they have a different way of doing business than the NFL is used to, a different way of doing business than professional sports is used to. Their world moves much quicker. They're a little more aggressive. They move money around in a far more advanced and aggressive way. So when they set their sights on something, they move. And that is clearly what Tepper did here in Carolina. He zeroed in on a candidate he wanted, and he was going to do whatever he had to do to get him. Now, the Giants will downplay whether or not they wanted Rule. Rule's name came up prominently with the Giants late October, early November, whatever it was. I told you on the air about it when it happened. I started hearing Rule's name, and I don't know Rule. I know he worked 1 year with Tom Coughlin. I know he's a New York guy, but his time at Temple, his time at Baylor, I've never really bumped into him. I've never even talked to him. So I don't know him, even though he's a local guy. Heard about him. But clearly he had become a guy who was a very heavy candidate and was for the Giants. And a lot of what you heard was that the Giants wanted Rule. Doesn't matter now, because now you're not going to hear that again, and they're going to downplay that completely. But whether they did or not, Carolina went out, boldly made a move. And within a couple of hours, it looked like that the Giants had allowed both McCarthy and Rule, who everyone had kind of placed as their top two candidates. Whether they were or not exactly, we'll never know, because this is always another part of the sport where teams lie and teams downplay their defeats because they can, because nobody ever knows exactly who's what order of candidate, nor does it matter. Okay, some of the guys who do the best jobs ever are guys who wind up being a team's third or fourth choice. Notre Dame tried to hire Dan Devine before they hired Ara Parsegian. Within a couple of years, I guarantee you they would never even admit that was the truth, but it was the truth. Kentucky tried to hire guys before they hired John Calipari. Look how successful he's been at Kentucky. Go down the line. That has happened so many times in so many spots. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be the first choice. You just have to be the right choice for a team. And Carolina wanted Rule. They wanted someone who had a vision for what football will look like years out. That's what Tepper was looking for, because when you look at things from a Wall Street perspective, Wall Street doesn't like the present. Wall Street hates the past, doesn't like the present, but loves the future. They're always looking for growth. They're always looking for the company that's going to be big 5 years out. They love projections. So that's why tech stocks are so popular, because they're the future. And that's how Tepper's looking at this. He wanted a guy who gave them a vision for where this franchise should be and how it should be built, where he can put his money into the things that will be important for the modern organization to run their football franchise going forward. And he got that in Rule. And Rule got a guy who, every time Rule talked about spending money, plus there was the idea here of a $10 million payout that had to be made to Baylor. I believe that's the number. That's the number I heard kicked around, was that Baylor was going to get $10 million from somebody because there was a buyout in the contract. A lot of these college coaches have big buyouts in their contracts. They have big contracts, but they have big buyouts in their contracts. And that allows the team to get right back into the mix and get another guy and get the guy paid for. And some of these schools have to raise money from alums to get another coach. So the buyout is a provision that helps them pay for the next guy if someone's going to come steal their coach, which is fair. I mean, let's be honest, that's completely fair. So that was part of it too. So this became an expensive buy today, and you never know if coaching numbers, because coaching numbers are not made public. There's no, they don't count against the cap. Teams can spend whatever they want on coaches. And they don't have to make coaching numbers public. They don't have to be made public. So you don't ever know exactly all the parts of a guy's contract. And I know that for a fact because I've known coaches and I've known some of the things they had in their contracts that no one ever knew about. Some wild things that people had in their contracts. Outrageous numbers of tickets or this or that or this perk or that perk or, double a player's share in bonus if they won a Super Bowl, whatever the player bonus share was, the coach got twice that or whatever it might be. So there's always a million different things in where you can structure contracts. But clearly, Carolina wanted him. They went and pursued him. They weren't going to take no for an answer, and they wound up giving a guy who has not been a head coach in the NFL, a guy who spent 1 year in the NFL, a guy who has done a nice job on building programs that had some problems at Temple and Baylor, but has never been one of the superstars of college football. This is not, a guy winning national championships. This is not Urban Meyer. This is not Saban. This is not Dabo. This is a guy who's done a nice job. But a guy who looked the part that maybe as a New Yorker, he was the right guy for the Giants. He wasn't going to get 7 years and $60 million from the Giants. You know that going in. But he did get it from Carolina or somewhere close to that. Who knows? Like I said, they can be exaggerated. It doesn't matter. They got their guy. They got a guy to build around. And if you're going to bring a young guy in like that, young in terms of his experience for the NFL, forget what his age is, young in terms of what he fits as far as coming in, you're going to have to give him a couple of years to build this program. You're going to have to give Rule a couple of years to get this done, to find the players he wants. And the one thing with Rule is he's not a guru. He's not sold to a style of play. This is not Lincoln Riley. This is not a guy who comes with a offense that he's married to. This is not a guy who's married to a certain style of play. This is a guy who comes in and he's going to basically build, you hope, a winner and be the kind of dynamic leader. Because that's what you need your coach to be. And that's something that the Giants had to go out to do. And right after the Giants had lost Rule, and they had lost McCarthy, and there were rumblings that McCarthy really wanted the Giant job. I don't know what's accurate or inaccurate there. I really can't tell you one way or the other what's accurate or not. I don't know. The bottom line is those two guys seemed to be the top candidates for the Giants when they started. There were other guys being mentioned. And the Giants, then you started to hear that the Giants might be interested in Garrett, and that would have been a really tough sell and a very, very wrong decision for the Giants right now. Now, if you wanted to bring him in as a coordinator, that's one thing. Bring him in as a head coach is a whole different thing. And I don't know if that was something they were contemplating or not. But that would have been heading in the wrong direction, and it looked like they were. But I think the Giants really salvaged things. I think they did. Because I think they hired a guy who has a chance to be the kind of head coach they haven't had here. And I will go into that much more prominently later on when we get to the fan part of the program, where it'll be for the Giant fans especially. But I like what Judge brings. I like what his experience has been. I like where he's been. I like the way he has been brought up as a coach, know a little bit about. I've heard things about him. He's a young man, educated with a good football background. His education background, listen, we're never going to hold that against somebody. We're never going to make that the reason why you love somebody. But the bottom line is he has a chance. And like I said, we'll get in that a little deeper. But he has a chance to be a successful head coach for a variety of reasons. And I think the Giants salvaged the day very well. I do think Rule was their guy. I do think things got away from them. I don't think they'll ever admit that. You always want to zero in on the guy you hired. You don't think about, you're not going to ever talk about the guy that got away. And like I said in the beginning, that's not important. The guy who gets away is not important. Your first choice doesn't have to be the guy. The guy you get's got to be the right choice. A lot of times you don't get the right choice or the first choice. A lot of guys will turn a job down. I know many jobs, many places where teams have had great success, where they were fortunate enough that somebody turned the job down and they got another guy who came in and stepped in and had enormous, enormous success. I know cases where guys were ready to fire a guy, couldn't get it accomplished for a number of reasons, and then were fortunate a year later that they didn't fire the guy because the guy went on to enormous success, that it's even comical to look at them as guys. As you know, the Giants, after 1 year, were about to fire Bill Parcells. How would their future have been if they had accomplished that feat, if they had gotten rid of Parcells after one season? The guy who now is among the great coaches of all time. Or if Duke had jettisoned Mike Krzyzewski after 2 terrible seasons and his inability to, nail down the big recruit. How about if they had just said, all right, enough's enough. We have no patience. You're not going to beat Valvano. You're not going to beat Dean Smith. You're not going to win in the ACC. What about if they had taken that, if Tom Butters had taken that tact? Think of how different the history of basketball would be over the last 3.5 decades. So it shows you just how different it is. Now the only team left, now that you've seen this very quick movement, and it shows you the shortage. It shows you the shortage of head coaches out there. Because look how quickly these teams rush to fill these jobs. They don't wait anymore. They don't wait because there's not a lot of candidates. McCarthy waited a year and prepared himself to strike quickly, to get his ducks in a row, to do some research, to get his staff ready, make his move. And I think he's a good fit there. I think he's a very good fit there for a variety of reasons. And now you have Rule in Carolina, where obviously they are looking to use Tepper's tremendous resources and his business acumen to build a winner that they hope can be a consistent one. And then you have the Giants, who are looking to finally, hopefully, have landed on a guy who can be a coach who can stay here and get something done after failing miserably as they have over the last 7 or 8 years, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, the Browns are the only team left. And, you're hearing some of the usual suspects. For the usual suspects for right now, McDaniels is always mentioned for every job. He will be mentioned for every job until he gets a job or until he finally takes a job, having, of course, left the Colts at the altar. Stefanski's a name you hear now over and over again. I know Jim Schwartz is being interviewed there again, and they hope now to have a coach by Saturday. That's their hope. Now, the other story is about Tua going in the draft. This is going to be a fascinating draft story, one that will probably captivate a lot of the time. The draft gets so much attention, and so many hours are spent on previewing the draft. It's amazing for a non-event in terms of, any real participation as we know sports to be. It has become one of the real great non-events and is promoted as one of the great non-events. And it's amazing how much attention it gets. And the other sports, let's be honest, they're jealous of how big the NFL draft is. But this year, this will be a fascinating study because you have a player, clearly a dynamic generational talent, but clearly a player who is a risk. This is a player who has not only a serious hip condition now, but who suffered three injuries, two serious ones in the past 2 seasons. So he's had a knee injury, two ankle injuries, and a major hip injury in 2 seasons. So the question you have is this injury prone, dynamic talent. Do you take a risk? And what team can step up and take that risk? Knowing that A, maybe it takes him a year to play, or B, maybe he never plays. And how much does it set you back? How far down or how successful or how covered do you have to be at the quarterback position that you can take that chance? If you're a team like a Miami Dolphin team, can you take that chance that high in the draft pecking order? Or is this something that has to be undertaken by somebody who can afford it way deep in the first round, like New England or New Orleans or Green Bay or somebody like that? Or is it somebody in between who rolls the dice? I will guarantee you this right now. Months before the draft, I will guarantee you this. Months before we ever see a physical, unless somebody comes forward with information about his condition that is so damaging that there's no way you can even insure him, which I don't think will be the case. I do think there'll be risk, but I don't think it'll be anything along that line. Putting that aside, I believe that not only will Tua be drafted in the first round, I believe he will be drafted in the top 10 players. I think he could be as high as 5, and I think a team, probably a team with an existing star at quarterback or an existing older player at quarterback, will trade up into the first round and take him. So I do think the gamble for him, not waiting a year, not going back to Alabama, the hope that he can be a high enough pick where he gets some money to start with. I think it will be a risk that he took that works out for him, because I think his talent is so special that I think he will be taken in the top 10 picks in the draft. I think somebody will reach up. I think somebody will trade up, because it will be that he will be too good to pass up. He'll be that, he's that unique a talent. I think when you think about him, and clearly he's been incredibly injury prone, and it has really cost Alabama any chance for a special season in each of the last 2 years is injuries. But I think you're looking at one of the 2 or 3 most accurate passes I've ever seen come out of college. That's how good he is. He doesn't have the strongest arm. He's got a good arm. Doesn't have the strongest arm. But as far as an efficient quarterback and an accurate passer, he has a kind of uncanny accuracy that is the rarest of rare commodities. Anytime you hear people talk about the quarterback position, they will tell you accuracy is the number one thing you'd want to have a quarterback to have. He has it on a level that is scary. He is one of the most accurate passes I've ever seen. He has an uncanny knack for making that pass, for making any pass. And while his mobility is going to be limited and his durability is going to be highly questioned, and rightly so, and is going to come under enormous scrutiny, this is a rare player who I do think still, while there's not going to be any, and there long ago hasn't been any tanking for Tua, which we heard about in September, but I still think he will be a player taken prominently and taken within the first 10 picks or so. We got a lot more to get to on this Tuesday on radio.com. Remember, we will be joining WFAN at 6 o'clock as part of our weekly programming will be there at 6 o'clock this evening. Obviously, the talk today, and I haven't heard any talk today on the fan. I haven't heard any of it. I've been busy all day. So I don't know what the reaction has been. I'm sure it was very unhappy when it was first announced that Rule had gone to Carolina. I don't know what the reaction has been to Judge. I tweeted a couple times today saying that I thought it was a solid choice. And I think it's a guy that brings a lot of qualities. He might not be a name people knew, but inside football, he's a prospect as far as a coaching candidate that people knew about. And the fact that he is a special teams coach, I think is a positive, not a negative. But more on him later, back after this. NFL is still front and center as we move closer towards the divisional playoff games. Really the big weekend. If you notice the one change, and it's a good one, is the idea of moving in this round, moving the Sunday game to the championship schedule. So you have the Saturday games still in the 4 and the 8 o'clock slot, but now you have the Sunday games, even on this round, played at 3 and 6:40, as you do in the championship weekend, which is something that makes plenty of sense, and they hadn't done in the past. They had still always kept the 1-4 setup on Sunday, like it was a typical Sunday, and be out of there early on Sunday. But now they set it up to get you ready, to condition you for the championship game to be played at the same time. And then, of course, Super Sunday, where the kickoff comes right around 6:30, as you know. So it gets you ready for that the next couple of Sundays, so you get conditioned for that kind of schedule. So the first game Sunday is not at 1 o'clock. It's at 3:05. And that, of course, will be the Texans and the Chiefs. And then, of course, the Seahawks and the Packers will be the 6:40 game come Sunday. So it's Vikings and Niners first. The Niners now a 7-point choice in that game. The Titans and the Ravens come after that, with the Ravens a 8.5-point choice. You know, Titans are getting a lot of attention off their performance for beating the Pats. And also, I think, because everybody is astounded how dominantly Henry's been running. I mean, I think everyone has looked at that and said, wow, this team, how are you going to stop this guy? This guy's going to go in there and get 180 yards. And, he has taken – that's the player that in this postseason, and this is where you make stars, is in the postseason. Henry now has kind of gone from being a guy who people would say, nice back, big back, nice back, to where people now are talking about Henry like a star. Henry is now, hey, everyone's talking about Henry. This is an unstoppable. Look at the size. Look at the speed. You can't tackle him with guys in the second. So you're hearing about him, where he has taken this quantum leap as a player the last couple of weeks. His whole dynamic across the country has changed enormously with his performance, and that's how good his performance was. The Pats didn't play badly on defense in that game. He was just that good running the ball. He was just that dominant running the ball. I mean, they had guys there, and he would run those, and they're short tacklers. The Pats don't play guys in the secondary who can't tackle, and that includes cornerbacks. A lot of teams play corners that can't tackle. The Pats, you have to tackle if you're a corner. And he's breaking tackles right and left. So you're hearing people give the Titans much more of a chance than you would have 2 weeks ago, because they beat the Pats, but also because of the presence of what Henry has brought. And if there's two players on the Pats that really opened everybody's eyes, two players on the Titans that really opened everybody's eyes, it's Henry and their punter, who made first-team All-Pro this year and who Bill Belichick had said was the best player on their team. I don't know if he'd recant that now with Henry, but he did say he was the best player on their team. He also is a first-team All-Pro. And he was utterly brilliant. The Pats got beat on special teams. They got beat in the turnover department that night, and they got beat on special teams that night. They got beat in the field position game. Those are things that never happened to the Pats, and they did in that game. So people are giving the Titans a much bigger chance there. And then you have the Texans and the Chiefs. And let's be honest, the Chiefs and the Ravens come into the playoffs playing really well. The Chiefs finished the season playing really well. They finished the season playing really well defensively. You like everything you've seen from him in that standpoint. And I think that, right now you have to, although you consider the Texans a dangerous team if they're down a couple of scores because of what Watson brings. He's got explosive receivers, especially a full of plays opposite Hopkins. And Watson, you could see them getting a backdoor cover if they're down a couple of scores. But let's be honest, we're all going to be surprised if the Ravens and the Chiefs don't meet in the AFC title game, even if we think the Titans and the Texans are going to play close. I think everybody expects there to be a Chief Raven AFC title game this year because of the way the two teams are playing. But what happens in this league is when you get a big win on the road, like the Titans did, or like the Vikings did, a lot of people get on that bandwagon because they'll say, wait a second, if the Vikings can play like that and can win in New Orleans, they can win anywhere. San Francisco doesn't have the experience. Why can't they go in and win there? San Francisco hasn't been great the last couple of weeks, so you're going to have a lot of people picking the Vikings. I don't think you'll have that many picking the Titans, but you will have a lot picking the Vikings. I don't think you'll have a lot picking the Texans, but I think a lot of them might pick them to cover the very large point spread, which is 9.5, which is a lot. In this day and age in the NFL, it's a lot. And then, of course, the Seahawks and the Packers are the last game, the game pitting the two quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls. The other three games have guys who are trying to get there and prove that they can join that group. And the Packers are now a 4-point choice. And Seattle's beat up. But the Packers have been woefully inconsistent this year. They've been really good at times, and sometimes they've been head-scratchingly puzzling. And Rodgers, for all his brilliance, did not have a great season this year. Not up to his past levels. Team uncovered a running back star. Pettine's defense did a good job at times. But he did not play to the level that he's played in the past. He had some years where he played to an incomparable level in terms of his being able to be accurate, to be mistake-free, to do some just amazing things. This year, he got off a pretty good protection. And he had for him, like I said, a so-so season. But we'll have more on these in the days to come. But right now, you like that the matchups here, they're interesting. And the fact that you have a couple of teams that have come off big wins and have those guys that you can believe in. You can believe in Watson maybe doing some special things on offense. You can believe in what Henry maybe can bring to the game. And you can believe what Cook and what a wonderful game he had. And the fact that he was injured late in the season, Zimmer talked about it. And Zimmer was, as you know, exceedingly confident. He predicted his team was going to win. He had guaranteed the announcers his team was going to win. And you know what? His team backed him up. That was a very good win for Zimmer. Zimmer and Sean Payton both were on the Parcells staff in Dallas. They're both Parcells guys. And that was a very big win for Mike Zimmer. Very big. And for the Vikings, who have, as we know, been another team in the postseason that has had its heart broken a lot. Yeah, they've had their moments, but they also have struggled to get deep into the playoffs. They might have had a moment, as we know they have a couple of times in recent years, but they have not been able to back that up with another one. And, it would be a very big deal if they got through this weekend and got themselves to an NFC title game. It also would put a smile on somebody else's face because they would rather not go to San Francisco if they could help it. Somebody would love to see, somebody knock off the Niners if that could be the case. But you have the young Niners looking to prove that they're ready to make this stand and make this claim. And the Ravens, too, looking to show everybody that as good as they've been, and let's be honest, statistically for the regular season, the Ravens were about as good as any team has been in this league in recent years. You have to go back a couple of years to see a team that finished the season playing as solidly as this Raven team did. This team was playing really well, both ways. Really, in every way, it was really playing very well late in the season. And Kansas City was picking it up, too, because they were really starting to catch on to Spags' defense. And while the offense was not showing you the incredibly explosive tendencies, because let's be honest, they've had a lot of guys. Mahomes has been hurt. Hill's been in and out of the lineup. They've had injuries on the offensive line. So they have been a little up and down as far. I mean, they're still lethal and they're incredibly fast, as you know. I mean, they have speed on top of speed on top of speed. But there's no question that their defense has started to come together. And early in the season, we wondered if they had made a lot of mistakes in maybe making too many radical changes to that defense after last year's very, very tough finish. As we all know, a D forward offsides cost them a chance to play for the title last year. Remember, they were remarkable in the second half against the Pats. They scored 30 points in the second half of that game and didn't win. So it was a heartbreaking defeat for Andy Reid, who's had a million of them. You know, Andy Reid has become the Marty Schottenheimer or the Chuck Knox of this era, where he has had great success. He has won significantly in two places. He has a tremendous coaching tree where he has sent a lot of coaches. I mean, you know the trees that are prominent, and how prominent the Walsh Holmgren tree is, and how prominent the Parcells tree is. But the Andy Reid tree, which has got connections, obviously, to the Holmgren tree also. There's some connection there. But Andy Reid has sent a lot of guys now as successful head coaches. And the only thing Andy needs to cement a Hall of Fame career, where it's a no-brainer, the day Andy sees the confetti come down on him, he's an automatic lock to make the Hall of Fame. Without that, people are going to point to a very disappointing championship record, a very disappointing postseason record. He's lost once in the Super Bowl. He's lost a lot in the title games. He's had some heartbreaking defeats in the postseason. We know that. And this is obviously another very big chance for him, with a very much a now team, to get there this year. And for a lot of this season, it looked like he had maybe overdone it with the moves he made and how many bags he packed to get from the defense. But in recent weeks, I'd say the last 6 weeks, the personnel has come together, and they have started to really get Spags' defense. And you remember with the Giants and how effective Spags' defense was. Now, they had better pass rushers than the Chiefs have. They had some wonderful people up front. We know that. But that team gave up 80 points in its first 2 games that year. And they were clueless on how to handle his defense. And it came together for them later in the season. And it looks like it is again for Spags' defense, which takes some time for the players to realize what they have to do and what their roles are and how to play the system. It takes them some time to grab that. And it looks like now the Chiefs have, the way they've played in recent weeks, all the way through. I mean, they gave up some points in Week 17. They gave up 21 points to the Chargers, fine. But if you go back the weeks before that and just look at weeks, all the way through before that, they gave up hardly anything week after week. I mean, they gave up 3 points to the Bears in Week 16. They gave up 3 points to the Broncos in Week 15. In Week 14, they allowed 16 points in beating the Patriots. In Week 13, they held the Raiders to 9 points. I mean, and they scored 40 points that day and held the Raiders to 9 points. So, and even the week before that, they did a good job also. So week after week, they have done a very nice job of shutting teams down ever since really ever since the Charger game back in week 12 or week 11, ever since then, they have kept teams from scoring, and only one team has scored 20 points against them in all that time, which is, very, very special. We have, it has surprised me that we have gotten so little attention so far paid to the national title game. Ohio State and Clemson played a classic game. I hope you saw that because it really was a classic game. There were some tough calls in that game. I know Ohio State felt they really got the worst end of the whistle in that game, and I think they did. I don't think it was anything. I think it was just unlucky more than anything else. But it was a great football game. It really was. While LSU embarrassed Oklahoma, as we knew they would. But this LSU team has become such a juggernaut offensively and has been established as a heavy, when you think about it, considering how good Clemson has been and considering how successful Clemson has been all year. It is surprising that they are 5.5-point favorites, but LSU has just been putting up incredible numbers. I mean, they embarrassed Saban's defense, the likes of which I hadn't seen anybody embarrass a Saban defense like that in a long time. This was not a good Saban defense, as we know. This was the worst defense Saban has coached in college, maybe ever. I mean, I don't even think any of his defenses, well, I know none of them at LSU, but I don't even think his Michigan State defenses, any of them, had the problems that this defense had. He had a great offense here with this Alabama team, but this defense was pitiful. And in the Saban era, they ranked worst in every single category. So the fact that LSU scored a lot of points against them shouldn't come as a surprise. I'm sure that Clemson, which has some good defensive personnel, they're not a great defensive team. They're an offensive team with a wonderful quarterback. And as good as the LSU quarterback has been this year, and he has been from an efficient standpoint, unbelievable. I mean, he has been as efficient as any quarterback we have seen in really the modern history of college football. He's not the prospect that the Clemson quarterback is, because the Clemson quarterback he's from Central Casting. I mean, he can run, as you saw in the Ohio State game. He's 6'6". He's tough. He's got a great arm. His pedigree is unbelievable. He's obviously going to be the first player picked. And if he came out this year, he'd be the first player picked, even considering what the Heisman Trophy winner has done this year. That's how talented he is. But you're talking about two guys who are now going to go off the board first in respective years. So you know they can score points. But nobody believes that even Clemson can slow down this LSU team, which has basically averaged a first down per play. And you have to go back to the days of the Nebraska triplets. You have to go back to the days of Turner Gill and Mike Rozier and Irving Fryer and the days of that Nebraska team that averaged 8.4 yards per play. Did it in a different way. Did it run an option football? And with a modicum of passing. This team is much more of a passing team. We know that. They have balance here, but they can beat you in a lot of ways with a lot of different looks, and they obviously are giving a great deal of credit to their offensive coordinator and to the efficiency of their quarterback, who's a coach's son, who waited a long time to play, who bounced around, finally got his chance, and has put together this mythical season. And I'm sure that Clemson has gone to school on the Auburn game, because Auburn this year played a very interesting game. Now, Auburn didn't show up in their bowl game against Minnesota, and I'm not trying to be unfair to Minnesota, which had explosive players and had a wonderful season under a coach who did dynamic things at Minnesota. I mean, that's an incredible season for Minnesota. But you never know what team's going to show up and what team's not going to show up in the bowl game. You just don't. And sometimes sometimes teams just don't show up. And I didn't think Auburn really showed up in the game. But when you look at LSU and you look at the numbers they've hung on people, 58 against Ole Miss and 50 against Texas A&M, even 37 against that Georgia defense. And then, of course, 63, and that's calling the dogs off, 63 against Oklahoma, which has no idea how to play defense. The Auburn game was a close, low-scoring game. Close, low-scoring, if I remember the top of my head, it was 23-20. But you're going to go back and look and see how that was played that way. Now, Auburn has major talent on the defensive line. And you're going to have to put a pass rush on this guy. That's the only way. You're not going to be able to cover their wide receivers. You're not going to be able to disrupt their sets. You're not going to ask your safeties and your corners to make dynamic plays and cover people all over the field. You're going to do it by getting to the quarterback. Otherwise, you're not going to do it at all. So either Clemson's going to get to the quarterback or they're going to outscore him in a shootout. Now, most people feel they're going to have to try to outscore him in a shootout. That might be harder than seeing if you can get those Clemson linemen to see if they can win some battles inside. But I'm sure they have gone to school on what Auburn did to keep that game down to a reasonable number, because if you look in recent weeks, Georgia's the only team in a long time that has kept LSU, under any reasonable number, and that was 37. And you know what they did against Alabama. So how impressive they've been this year, setting records upon records upon records. And Clemson's been good, but they played a soft schedule. They came on like crazy, and they didn't give up a lot of points. I mean, until they gave up 23 against Ohio State, they had given up 17 to Virginia. They gave up 3 to South Carolina, 3 to Wake, 10 to NC State. So they put together big numbers defensively, but they were playing really subpar, opponents. And everyone kind of forgot about Clemson all year because of the fact that they had played the Carolina game. And Mac Brown, if you remember, went for 2. He had a chance to beat him. He didn't go to overtime. He decided, and I think rightly so, listen, I'm going to bring this down to one play. If I got to play them even a set of downs, they're better than I am. Let me take it down to one play. The problem was he ran a lousy 2-point play. I was watching at the time, and he ran a lousy 2-point play. So from that standpoint, people kind of gave up on Clemson being that strong this year. But since then, they've played really well. And they are, I don't think they're better than Ohio State. I think Ohio State and Clemson, if they played 5 times or 6 times, they'd probably be split to 6 games. I think they're pretty equal. And I think Ohio State had about as good a chance to beat LSU as Clemson has. Maybe Clemson has a little better one because of the quarterback. But it's going to be fascinating to watch. But it surprises me, despite the fact you have the Heisman Trophy winner and this dynamic, undefeated LSU team and this Clemson team, which has become the big, prolific winners now with the winning streak and the championships. The game has gotten no attention. Now, maybe there's too long space for the game, but it'll be very interesting to see if this game gains any national momentum in the next couple of days as it leads up to Monday night. It's going to have to deal with the NFL this weekend. And divisional weekend in the NFL is such a strong Saturday and Sunday. And then the reaction to what happens on Monday. And this week in the NFL, you have the coaches all getting jobs, which has grabbed a lot of the oxygen. So from that standpoint, I wonder how much they're going to be able to generate with this game. And I didn't think this would happen. But I think now, after viewing the bowls again this year and the separation from the title game and the fact that they moved the semifinal game so early, where they were played on the 28th of December and not played later than that, like December 31st or January 1st or January 2nd, played so early. And then you don't have a championship game until January 13th. That spacing is probably good for the two teams, but way too long in terms of keeping any momentum for college football. And because of the way that these 3 games now have smothered the other games except for the Rose Bowl, which stands alone. And the Rose Bowl can always stand alone because it's at the right day. Everyone's off on New Year's Day. Everyone's home at 5 o'clock on New Year's Day. And they turn the Rose Bowl on, and it looked beautiful. If you've never been to the Rose Bowl, it is the most perfect setting for football. It's a great stadium. There's not a bad seat in the stadium. The scenery, the mountains, the sky, the climate, there's nothing like it. It's one of the real special, regal places in sports. So that game, even if it's only a good game, it seems like a great game because it's the Rose Bowl. So the Rose Bowl has been able to maintain its dignity, its appeal, but the other bowls have gotten killed all the way down the line. Even Alabama, Michigan had nothing. Even having Minnesota upset Auburn had nothing. The other bowls, Georgia, Baylor, nothing. So while I thought the idea of a Final Four made sense and not disrupting the playoff anymore, I do think now, and I think it's probably 4 or 5 years away, but I do think now, looking to the future, you will have a situation where they will expand the college football playoff because the 3 games have been so successful that the playoff should now get bigger. Yes, it's going to hurt some bowl games. It's going to cause some bowl games problems. It's going to kill even some more bowl games, but it's inevitable. The money's going to be too big. There's not going to be any way around it. And the 3 games set up the way they were like this year, having them played as early as they were on the 28th, just killed New Year's. I mean, New Year's Day had no appeal. You had 2 big games on the weekend, and nobody even paid attention. I mean, I didn't even have anybody ask me who wasn't a big college football fan even about any of the games on New Year's Day. And that's a big problem for college football. So while the playoff has worked incredibly well for them, and college football has reached an enormous height in recent years, it's the one sport, the Big Ten Network has been incredibly successful. It has promoted itself very well. The sport has expanded well. But look at right now how playing those games on the 28th and having this long lull period, how little attention this classic game with these 2 classic quarterbacks, 2 undefeated teams, dynamic years these teams have had, great storylines abounding. Clemson coming off a miraculous win against Ohio State, and that game has gotten 0 attention since that game was played. And I understand that the NFL is going to have played 2 weekends of playoffs in between. They have got to shorten the time, and they have got to carve out dates better for themselves because clearly they've gotten hurt here in a big way this year. And I think the game leading up to it, you're going to be surprised how little national attention the game is going to get. Now, listen, ESPN's going to flood it. You know that. That's what they do. But they're tied. They're married to college football. So they are going to do that. But elsewhere, I don't think it's going. The game, as big as it is, and it's a can't-miss game. And even if you're just an NFL fan, it's a can't-miss game because here are the next 2 number 1 draft picks going head-to-head. That's what they are. Tua is now injured. He's kind of an aside right now. He's a sidebar story. You have this kid who came out of nowhere who people want to compare to Tom Brady in terms of efficiency and the quarterback that he's become and the offense that he's run and how amazingly efficient. I mean, this guy could have thrown 10 touchdown passes. He literally could have thrown 10 touchdown passes against Oklahoma. He might have been able to throw a dozen if he wanted to get nasty. That's how easy it was for them. They could have scored 80. And very rarely, I mean, I can think of a few times in my life I've seen a team that really could have gone in and scored 80. They could have scored 80. They were that good that day. They were that overpowering offensively that day. And now Clemson's got to try and stop this. And it's going to be fascinating to watch. But I think this system now needs an overhaul. And I know their allegiance to the bowls. I know some of the bowls like to puff out their chests and still think that they can have a command, but I think they probably had to be a little disillusioned by what went on this year, because having those games played on the 28th really took away any appeal, unless you're just a crazy and love all the bowl games. And I do. I like the bowl games. I admit it. But even I played golf during the early games on New Year's Day. And that's a bad sign. I mean, I know that it had rained a lot of days in Florida, so getting out in the sunshine was, appealing because, Florida had an incredible amount of rain they rained for like 15 days in a row, like the first 7 we were down there. So we jumped at the chance to finally get out in the sunshine. But still, those games had very little to keep you watching. And that's a negative. So I think they will get to first an 8-team playoff. I think that will be on the board within a couple of years. I really do. And we have a half hour coming up, obviously, from 6 to 6:30 on the Fan. The big story there will be the Giants and them finding a new head coach after one was, maybe, depending on your storyline, maybe swiped out from underneath them by one of the barons of Wall Street. And then, of course, the Knicks making a stop tonight. With the Lakers, we'll have a couple of thoughts on the Lakers, too, and what the Lakers have to do to make themselves into a championship team this year. I mean, just having LeBron there makes you a championship contender, but what they have to do I have my eye on one player that I think could make a difference. They don't have a lot of resources, but we'll get into that a little bit, too. So we'll come back with that right after this.
On the Fan, New York Sports Radio. Mike's on, Mike's on. He'll get you the sports any way that he can. It's Mike Francesa on the Fan. Sports Radio 66, WFAN.
All right, on this January 7th, a Tuesday night, this is Mike's On, Francesa on the Fan, and on a night where as you drive home, you're contemplating the fact that the football giants have gone and hired a coach, and you're saying, who the heck is this guy? Now, here's the deal. If this guy had, especially in the wake of the Rule stuff, now, Giant fans didn't know a whole lot about Rule, but they had heard his name a lot, and now he had become a name that became a little bit of an obsession. I know he was plastered everywhere in the last couple of weeks, and it was McCarthy, then it was Rule, and Rule was the guy the Giants wanted. And I do think the Giants wanted Rule. I think they'll deny that now because that's what teams do. When they don't get their guy, of course they say, we don't want him anyway. That wasn't the guy we wanted. We wanted you to think that. We all know it's nonsense. It doesn't matter, though. It doesn't matter if you got your choice. What matters if you got the right guy. And and I did not hear any reaction today. I did not hear the Fan at all. So I don't know what fans are saying about this. And I just asked, and they said it was mixed. If this guy had this resume, and he came from any team but New England, there would be a absolute uproar now about what are the Giants have gone mad. The only thing that could have been worse is if the Giants had actually hired Jason Garrett, which I don't think they ever really seriously contemplated. I'm going to give them the credit that I don't think they ever seriously contemplated doing it. Okay, that would have been a disaster. Do I think they will? I don't know where the Giants were with McCarthy. You heard his name prominently. I started hearing Rule's name late October, early November. I mentioned that during the show in the fall, that all of a sudden I'm hearing Rule, and I don't know Rule. I mean, I know he was with Coughlin for a year. I know what he's done in college at Temple and Baylor. But I don't know him. I don't think I've ever interviewed him. I don't know him. I've never met him. I know he's a local guy. I think the Giants were after him. I think they liked a lot of the stuff they thought about him. And clearly Tepper went in, thought the Giants were going to hire him, and beat him to the punch. It was a clear sweep him off his feet. The Giants weren't going to pay a guy who's never coached in the NFL and never won a Super Bowl. They were never going to pay a guy that kind of contract. There's not a chance in the world he was ever getting that contract from the Giants. Never. So you know that going in. There were no way they were paying that. That's an extremely outrageous contract. But when you're a guy who's got billions of dollars, and remember, a guy like Tepper is going to change the dynamic. He's going to do things differently because to him, spending money is part of the business. And the league doesn't like having flamboyant owners like this. They don't like guys who throw money around like this, but they'll live with it. Because you know what he did do? He raised the price of all their franchises by spending a lot for his franchise. That they do like. And he went in. He wanted his guy. He got his guy. He paid him a ton of money. And doesn't matter what the Giants say about who they wanted. So many times teams don't get their first choice, and they're lucky they didn't. And the guy who was the second choice, the third choice, winds up being a tremendously successful coach. And then you hear 3 years later, they always wanted him. Of course, that was the case. Remember, the Giants tried to fire Bill Parcells in his first season. That's a fact. Luckily, they didn't. Otherwise, the history would be very different. So it is. Okay, Duke could have jettisoned Mike Krzyzewski. After 2 losing seasons, they thought about it. They thought better of it. And didn't, despite the fact he couldn't get a big recruit to come to the campus. He was getting out-recruited in the right and left and losing guys right and left. Didn't matter. They didn't, and the rest is history. Notre Dame tried to hire Dan Devine. He turned him down. They hired Ara Parseghian. So it doesn't matter. It matters if they landed on the right guy. And I think this time, while we never know, if a guy has not been a head coach, I've always talked about this. There is an element here of luck involved, and it is a crapshoot. Whenever you are going to hire an assistant, no matter how prominent, you don't know if he's going to be good or not. As Rick Majerus, my old friend, used to say, when you slide down the bench in basketball that 18 inches from an assistant coach to a head coach, it's a completely different world. Same thing is true in football. When you go from being an assistant to a head coach, it is a completely different set of dynamics that is at work. You have completely different things that make you good. But the one thing that you need to find is a guy who has the ability to lead men and has that in his nature. If you can't read that, then you're dead. You have to see that. You have to see that that guy has that look. And from what I've heard, and I don't know Judge, and don't know him at all, but I know people who do. And I know of his background. And I think they landed on a very solid choice here. Now, again, he's got to come in. He's got to command the staff. He's got to command his players. He's got to handle, obviously, the media in the city. There's a lot that goes into being a head coach. But the one thing I will count on with this guy is he will not have the myopic vision that these other guys have had. This is not an offensive coordinator dressed up as a head coach. This is not a play caller dressed up as a head coach. This is a football man. And that's why getting a special teams guy who had already started to branch out. Special teams in New England is an important job because Belichick, like Parcells, has always believed that you don't take the foot out of football, that special teams are 1/3 of the game. It is something they stress tremendously. And it's always a very important role in their teams. And we know that very few guys have been special teams coaches and become head coaches. They get overlooked all the time. Of course, Harbaugh has become the guy who has become for special teams coaches the patron saint because he's gone on to a lot of success as a head coach, having been a special teams coach. But he had asked, if you remember, to expand his duties, and he had started to coach on the defensive side and then got a look as a head coach. Judge had started to expand to the offensive side, plus he was a quarterback. Plus he comes from the Saban school and the Belichick school. He has been taught at Alabama and taught at New England. If you're going to get taught football, you want to get taught at places where they win all the time. You hope it rubs off. Now, Belichick's assistants haven't been good head coaches. Why? Well, it could be a variety of things why that's the case. Many times, guys who are good and very good at their job are not good at being commanding figures. They're not made to be head coaches. From what I know of this guy's personality, that is not the case. This is a guy that I think you will find will be a commanding presence and will be finally a disciplinarian. And to me, that is still important. He's a young guy. He's been around winning football. Special teams gives you a look at, because with special teams, you take from everybody and you deal with everybody. And you're not just about one part of the game. One of the biggest drawbacks that I have found with these and it became in vogue in this league, and we've seen it in recent years with the Giants with both of their recent head coaches, that they were so wrapped up in their offense that they didn't know how to coach the game. They didn't know how to cut the roster. They didn't know how to bring the right people to the game. They didn't know how to game plan, and they didn't know how to coach the game and coach the game as it went on. They did not make the adjustments. They did not handle time well. They did not handle game scenarios well. They were extremely limited in that. The guy who's the good head coach is the guy who sees the entire picture and can handle it. What you do as a head coach is you put out fires. When a player has a problem, it's your problem. When a coach has a problem, it's your problem. When part of your team breaks down, it's your problem. Everything is your problem. And you can't just have your head stuck in a play sheet and be the head coach. It doesn't work that way. Being a football generalist is what makes a head coach, and the head coach who becomes that figure, who expands and can handle all the details, who has his hand in everything. And he has watched two guys who know how to do that. He watched Saban do it. He watched Belichick do it. And he was someone who has studied more than one part of the football team. And I think that is an overriding positive virtue that he brings to the job. That and the fact that he is known to be a guy who can command the room, that he's intelligent, he can command the room, and he's tough. And if you're going to be the head coach in this town, you need to have some presence, and you need to be able to command the room, and you need to be able to command your team. The media will take care of itself. All you have to do in this town to take care of the media is win. Then it's easy. If you win, you got them eating out of your hand. That goes without saying. Completely, that's the way. But when the Giants lost Rule, I said the Giants are still caught in that fog. They let McCarthy get away, which I thought they needed an experienced guy. I thought the Giants needed a guy who we knew was going to bring a commanding presence in here, so I would have gone with McCarthy. I had heard good things about Rule, though I didn't know him. So I thought, all right, they've decided McCarthy, maybe he wanted the Cowboys, maybe he didn't. I don't know which way he wanted more. I've heard rumors both ways. Doesn't matter. They're going to center on Rule. They lose both of them, and I'm thinking, what are the Giants doing? But they then landed on a guy That surprised me. I thought they would pick another offensive coach and find themselves trapped in the same problems they've been in the past. They went in a different way, and I'm telling you, I think the Giants, for the first time in a long time, made a solid choice here. Is it automatic? Nothing in this league's automatic. You never know for sure which guy is going to turn out to be the right guy. But I think if you look at what I know about this guy, I think this is a very, very solid choice. Back after this. Judge has never been a coordinator, no less a head coach. But understand this. Now, last year, he asked to move out and branch out, and he coached the wide receivers. This guy was a special teams coach. Special teams is not like coaching a position. When you deal with special teams, when you're the special teams coordinator, the special teams coach, you have varied responsibilities. Plus, you deal with every department on the team. You deal with everybody on the team because you decide each week which guys are going to come to the game, which guys are going to play. And you take from everywhere. You take from the deep backs. You take from the wide receivers. You take from the running backs. You take from a variety of places, and it gives you a well-versed job, and you're involved in a lot of situational football. So I think in a lot of ways, from a straight position coach, the special teams guy is almost a third coordinator in his own right. Now, maybe he's never called plays. And listen, they're going to bring in a prominent offensive coordinator. There's been talk they're going to bring Jason Garrett in as an offensive coordinator. If that happens, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think a guy like Garrett, who, to me, Garrett is not a bad offensive coordinator. He's not a great one, but he's not a bad one. I think he's just not a leader. I think certain guys aren't leaders who can do a job well. I thought Norv Turner is a perfect example. Wade Phillips and Norv Turner are a perfect example of guys who are very good at game planning, very good at being coordinators, terrible as being head coaches because they're just not commanding figures. Romeo Crennel, who's a friend of mine, the same way. Romeo's a wonderful coordinator. He's got enough rings to show you. He's got a drawer full of them. He's not a head coach because he's a good guy. You can't be a great guy and be a head coach. You got to have some nasty. You got to have some toughness. You got to be willing to – you don't care if players like you or not. You need to command the room, command your coaches. You're not there to make friends. You're there to win games. And that means commanding your coaches and commanding your players. And the Giants haven't had a commanding figure in a while. Neither of the last two guys were commanding in any way. And all they've done is lose. They need to get one. This guy has some of that. At least that's what has been portrayed to me about him. And I like the background. I like the generalist approach. I think he will have a much more wide open vision and will have an all-encompassing vision of the team on how to build a team and how to run a team. And I think that's what has been missing so dramatically from the Giants is an accountability of making the players accountable, making the coaches accountable, not making the same mistakes week after week, not just, the same stuff week after week being accepted as being good enough. So I don't expect everybody to automatically love this move. You wouldn't want that. But do I see something here that I'm not shaking my head at? Yes. I actually like the move. I actually think this is a surprising choice for the Giants because I think the Giants have been so lost for so long. I think they've done, and listen, I think the only thing they did wrong this offseason was they didn't jettison Gettleman with Shermer. They should have done both and started fresh. I think that's what they should have done. They didn't do that. But I think this move, they're bringing someone in who can have some presence, and they are in desperate need of football leadership and football presence. And unless I miss my mark, and if I do, we'll see it. I think this guy is going to bring some of that to the table, from what I understand, and that's what you need to see. And I think if that's the case, that will be a distinct positive. And again, we'll wait and see. Would the Giants have ever, if it got into a bidding war, would they have ever gone there for rule? No chance. With no chance would the Giants ever pay their coach that. You'd have to win a lot before you get paid from the Giants. There's just no way. Tepper does business a little differently. This is a guy who's going to bring a different, way of doing things and a dynamic way of doing things. The Wall Street, big money way of doing things to the league. You saw that today. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with him. Maybe he found his guy. We'll see. It'll be fascinating to see how Rule does in Carolina. I think McCarthy's a good fit considering that Dallas roster. I think he will do a good job there, going in there with a veteran staff. I'll reserve to see. My first thing I'll look for, and you should look for, is to see what kind of staff Judge puts together. I hope the Giants allow him to do what he wants with the staff. Don't enforce a staff on him. If he's got enough presence and enough leadership where he has guys that he wants, let him have his guys. That should be the province of the head coach. He should be able to run his guys. Let him. He's going to run that staff. He's going to have those coaches. He has to live with those coaches. Those coaches decide whether he gets fired or stays. Let him pick those guys. And believe that he has enough. You just named him as your head coach. You got to believe he has enough presence and enough smarts to put together a staff. If you didn't, why would you hire him as your head coach? He had to move you enough in the interview that you thought enough of him that you should be now at least comfortable enough to back off and let him get the guys he wants. So the only team left is the Browns. I'm sure they'll wind up, I would think they'd wind up with McDaniels, but with McDaniels, you never know. You never know if he'll leave or not. That's the logical choice there. We'll see how that unfolds. Knicks tonight, out to see the Lakers. So, if that interests you, obviously the Knicks have been playing a little better. Nothing to get all excited about, but at least, trying to make things a little, more competitive. It's funny. Everyone's looking at the Lakers now and wondering the piece that they can get. And they don't have a lot of resources. They obviously spent all of them, making the move they did. So they don't have a whole lot. But if there's one piece, and let's be honest, they don't need a point guard. People keep saying they trade for a point guard. LeBron's your point guard. We know that. You don't need that. You need somebody who can knock down a three, and they need somebody who can play defense in the half court in critical times and can handle pick and roll and can do the things that they need a defensive guy to do. And that's why, to me, the perfect player for them is Iguodala. He's going to be moving. The question is, can he wind up there? That's the guy. He's got enough left. He has that little Robert Horry touch in the postseason. He'd be perfect for that team. And that could be enough. If they can keep Davis healthy, LeBron's going to be a handful in the postseason. And I just think that would be the perfect guy who would be the fit. They've done well in the regular season. It looks inevitable out there. I think Dallas is another year away, another player away. You like what they've built there. They're well on their way. Denver's not been as good as they were last year. They could still put it together, but I still think it's very much the Lakers and the Clippers. And I think they need that one player who can help them on the defensive end and also give them the guy who can knock down that big three. The guys they're going to play at crunch time right now outside of the big two are going to be, Pope and Green. But Iguodala would be perfect. Absolutely perfect. And he is a winning player of the highest order. He is a postseason player. He's a championship player. He's an uncanny three-shooter, even though he can't make a free throw. And he is a classic, even though in his old age, he's a classic big spot defender. That would be the guy for me. Because otherwise, there's not really much out there. There's talk of them maybe landing somebody from the Knicks. There's not anybody I really want if I'm the Lakers. It really isn't. There's not anybody there that's going to help me that much. That's the guy I'd want. And I think if you play it just right, that could possibly happen. I could see that. I could see that being the case. I mean, it's going to be fascinating, and I think the thing that's going to be the most positive is the fact that the layoff LeBron had last year is going to allow him to be very, very fresh. You know, that was like a new lease on life. Him missing a bunch of games last year and then not playing in the postseason for the first time and not having those grueling months of action where he carries everything. Also keep his minutes under control here in the regular season, and he will be an absolute monster in the postseason. And I think it's going to be fun to watch. It really is. I think it's going to breathe a lot of life back into an NBA, which needs it right now. I mean, it hasn't been a great year, as we know, for them. It's been a good time for the NFL as far as TV ratings. It has been a good time as far as attendance. That's a story for another day. I think you're going to see leagues building smaller stadiums in the years to come. We can get into that one day because I think that's the model for the future. Very fancy, smaller ballparks because the attendance is going to continue to dwindle as it gets better to stay home for a variety of reasons, especially on football Sundays. But that's, as we said, a story for another day. So on this Tuesday, we will see you tomorrow. Have a very good night. A lot going on the rest of the week. We've got a lot of football to look forward to. I guess Steve Summers is off. And I guess one of my old guys there is ready to take over. Sal is ready to come up next. So after a quick break, we'll send it to him. Have a good evening, everybody.